Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Melanin Margin, the weekly chat show where conversations about race are never off the table. We're your hosts, Quaviondre Williams.
And Daquon Wilson.
So let's get into this week's conversation. What's hot on the table this week?
Airbnb came under hot water recently as a TikTok video went viral showing a former slave cottage being listed on its site. The video by Winton Yaton, a black attorney, shows Yaton's disbelief that such a listing is even allowed, stating, quote, "This is an 1830s slave cabin that is up on Airbnb as a bed and breakfast. How do I know that this is a slave quarters other than just using my eyes and looking at it? Well, they say it in the listing. How is this okay in anyone's mind to rent this out, a place where human beings were kept as slaves?" End quote. He goes on to call out the mostly white reviewers for their tone deaf comments, calling the former slave cabin memorable, historic but elegant, and, quote, "a delightful place to step into history, southern hospitality, and stay a night or two," end quote. Airbnb removed the listing and in a statement wrote, quote, "Properties that formerly housed the enslaved have no place on Airbnb. We apologize for any trauma or grief created by the presence of this listing and others like that, and that we did not act sooner to address this issue," end quote. Yaton concluded the video stating, quote, "The history of slavery in the country is constantly denied, and now it is being mocked by being turned into a luxurious vacation spot," end quotes. So, Andre, I want to ask you, is it ever okay for the commercialization of sites such as former slave cabin and plantation houses?
Um, Before I answer the question, I would like to first commend Airbnb's response to this. Even though it was a listing placed by one of their users, they still took accountability and apologized for the hurt that the listing caused. They didn't beat around the bush. They didn't try to push the blame somewhere else. And they didn't say, "We apologize if some people were hurt." They directly stated that people were hurt and that this behavior was not something that they stood for and will not be allowed on their platform, and apologize for not acting sooner. This is how you apologize when shit like this happens. This is an example of apology plus action. Now, back to the question. I think that the answer to this question is clear, and it's an answer that we've given time and again over and over throughout the years, yet people still can't seem to understand why the fuck this is a problem. This was not okay in the past. It is not okay in the present, and it is should never be okay in the future. I mean, places of trauma and abuse can never be cozy and elegant or beautiful. The atrocities of slavery still have ripples in time that affect us today and should never be forgotten. There's a reason why Auschwitz hadn't been renovated or turned into a hotel, but instead preserved by the Polish government as a museum, because it serves as a remembrance of the 1.1 million people who died there, including 960,000 Jewish people. It's because they don't want to erase the horrors that took place during the Holocaust. They want us to see it, to remember it, so that we don't allow such horror to occur again. Yet white America does not want to follow the footsteps of the Polish government. White America would rather try to erase the horrors of slavery because it makes them look bad. They don't want us to talk about racism because to do so would mean to unpack how they still benefit from it societally, socially, politically, financially, and culturally. They want to renovate the slave cabins and make them hospitable because to do so would soften the truth of the terrible living conditions slaves had to endure. They don't want their kids to learn about it because to do so would mean to teach them that it's very possible that people in their family line owned brutalized and tortured slaves. It's their way of changing the connotation of slavery, but you can't erase the pain. You can't change the past. Chattel slavery happened, and no amount of renovated slave cabins, plantation weddings, or shifting the focus from the truth of antebellum South will change that. Those slave cabins are history lessons to remind white America that their hands are not clean. But Daquan, what about you? I mean, do you think this kind of thing is ever okay?
It is never okay. And honestly, I say if I know somebody that has a plantation wedding, that's the red flag. That's a you, don't invite me to that because not not gonna come. Or like there was also a story of how this corporate entity had a retreat at a plantation, and they were like dressed in period attire, and their one black employee really showed them why that is a bad idea. So I don't think that it's ever okay to commercialize these places where atrocity happens because an atrocity happened there. The only time we need to really talk about these places is in the context of what happened there. We don't need to call it this historic, elegant place. No, this is a place where people were enslaved. This was a place where people were beaten, whipped, worked to the bone, and died. It's not some cozy Airbnb place where you just go for a luxury vacation. There is blood on the leaves. There is blood in these cabins and on the steps of the plantation house. Yet white America chooses to ignore it. They don't want to deal and reckon with the idea that their family members could have been a part of why these places are so egregious to this day. And it is absolutely disgusting that we see this commercializations because not only was I shocked that there was this listing, but I was shocked that there was multiple. Like Airbnb really said, we're sorry for the multiple listings that were on this of slave cabins and slave plantations. And it was like, so y'all had multiple, and there was nothing done, no type of insight or whatever. But like you said, Airbnb did handle this well. They, within 24 to 48 hours, took down the listing, addressed it, was like, there is no place for this. We apologize for any um, things that the harm we caused. And so it wasn't like you said, like, if you were offended, we're sorry. No, it was like, we are sorry because we know that this can create grief, it can create trauma and harm, and we apologize for that. So I think that moving forward, we really need to stop commercializing and romanticizing places of slavery and the antebellum South because they're not places to be romanticized. It's not all moonlight and magnolias, gone with the wind shit. This is a real place where egregious atrocities happened, and we need to reckon with that.
Yeah. I also think that the reason why so many people want to stay at sites like this or have events at places like this is because there's this undercurrent that slavery happened so long ago and that we've quote unquote come so far. I mean, it creates a disconnect from the reality of our history. Also, I think that these places do not have the same emotional weight for people whose ancestors have not experienced such atrocities. Now, I don't speak for all Black people, but for me, whenever I've entered plantation lands or sites where slaves were present, my entire body stands on the edge of anxiety and fear. I mean, even though I have never experienced the pain of my ancestors, I still feel the echoes of that trauma in my heart. I remember stepping into a plantation home that had been renovated and turned into a library, but on the side of the house, there was a slave quarters. Now, even before I saw that, the moment I pulled in, I just felt this fearful apprehension. This feeling only got worse when I stepped into the house itself because all I could think was that I wasn't supposed to be here or that this was not a place for me to feel safe or comfortable. When I told my Black coworkers about this, Many agreed and said that they felt the same and tried their best to avoid going there. Conversely, my white coworkers said that the library was so lovely and that they thoroughly enjoyed being there. Now, again, this isn't to say that my white coworkers didn't understand the gravity of places like that. But like I said, the history just has a different meaning for them. I mean, why would they feel out of place in a space that was made to make them feel safe and comfortable? For people whose ancestors have never had to feel the effect of a space's history, makes the pain of that space a mystery that they have the luxury of never having to solve. But Daquan, I mean, why do you think so many people want to stay or have events at sites like this?
It's because they don't have to reckon with the trauma and grief that happened there. Like you, I had a pretty similar experience at a former slave cottage. Um, I went on this field trip in high school where the two white history teachers took a group of their mostly POC students, mostly black students, to stay the night at a slave cottage. And in the moment, I was like, all right, this is a history field trip. We're going to learn some history and it will give me extra credit. That was all that I was worried about because I knew that I would have one of the history teachers the next year and he was not going to lie, a hard ass. So I was like, okay, let me do this, get on his good side. But then I got there. I was like, I would never do this ever again,
Mhm.
especially not for no white man. But seriously, it was something that, like you said, you can't even describe how you feel. There's just this presence that's just telling you to get out, that this is not the
Yep.
place for you, that you shouldn't be here. And if that's not the connection you have to that space, you're not going to feel it and even just understand it to that level.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm not going to say that your white coworkers are racist or that they
Yeah.
don't understand race because, frankly, they probably do. But unless you have that deep tie to that land, it hits differently, especially because, like, this place was a place in South Carolina. My family is from South Carolina, so I could literally imagine my ancestors,
Mhm.
my very own ancestors being there, working that land,
Same.
having to
Yeah.
live in those conditions. And this was a slave cabin that was, preserved. I can't imagine the cognitive dissonance of being in a slave cabin and having all of these modern amenities of just like running water and all of these different things because that really erases everything that goes on in those places. And so, even in historical context, there are, this icky feeling that comes from being in there as a black person. But if you don't have that connection, you're not going to understand it to the level. And frankly, like I said, people love to romanticize the antebellum South. People love the moonlight and the magnolias, gone with the wind fantasy, and want to live that. And so places who want money are going to see these places, convert it, and capitalize on white America's fascination with the antebellum South.
Yeah, I think it's really, to me, it just goes to show the depth of, like you said, how far away white people are from slavery and the effects of it. Like, unfortunately, no matter how much we teach, no matter how much we try to educate, no matter how much self-education a white person goes through, they will never fully understand that trauma in the way that people like me and Daquan would. And like I said before, of course, we haven't ourselves experienced that, but that pain feels different what is it, post-traumatic slave syndrome. That stuff still has effects in us to this day. There are still things that travel from history that are still present in our day and age. And I think that what people don't understand is that, especially if you're raised in a Black household, there are things that your parents and your grandparents do that are historical, like they come from their ancestors, they've learned it from their ancestors. So there are certain ways that they treat their children that echo the past. Like, I think that one of the things we talked about on the show before was in the post-traumatic slave syndrome book, that the way that Black mothers sometimes will say, if they are speaking to a white parent, they'll put down their Black child. They'll say, oh no, he's not, he's a handful. When they talk about, even though they're very smart, very successful, they're doing what they're doing a great job, they'll be like, oh, he's just so much to deal with, X, Y, and Z. And that comes from back in the day, where white people would come up and look, oh, you got a good young buck here, or a good young whatever. It's kind of like, oh no, he's not good, and whatever, in order to keep them from taking their child. So when we say that, white people will never understand it, it's because in their white households, those echoes of history are not present. Those echoes of trauma do not exist in their household, but it still exists in ours. Now, so many children grow up never knowing the full scope of what their culture has contributed to society and history. So it's time for a change. Let's take a pause, rewind, and remind the world just how we did that. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, we learn about Carter G. Woodson, who was born December 19th, 1875 in New Canton, Virginia. Raised in a poor family, Woodson supported himself by working in the coal mines of Kentucky and was thus unable to enroll in high school until he was 20. After graduating in less than 2 years, he taught high school, wrote articles, studied at home and abroad, and received his PhD from Harvard University in 1912. In 1915, he founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History to encourage scholars to engage in the intensive study of the Black past. Prior to his work, the field had been largely neglected and distorted in the hands of historians who accepted the traditionally biased picture of Blacks in America and world affairs. In 1916, Woodson edited the first issue of the association's principal scholarly publication, the Journal of Negro History, which, under his direction, remained an important historical periodical for more than 30 years. In 1962, in an effort to focus attention on Black contributions to civilization, he founded Negro History Week, which served as the basis for what we now know as Black History Month.
If you don't know Mr. Carter G. Woodson, you better learn. You better learn.
You gonna learn today.
You gonna learn today. Adelaide Hall was, according to Ella Fitzgerald, one of the world's first jazz singers. Hall was also an entertainer and a major influence in the New Negro Renaissance. Born in Brooklyn but raised in Harlem, Hall began singing at a young age as part of a church choir. She and her sister Evelyn performed together at local events and special occasions as a group named the Hall Sisters. Though devastated when her sister died of pneumonia in 1920, Hall was determined to keep performing, and she got her first big break in the 1921 Broadway show, Shuffle Along, in which she landed a small part. Hall began to become an international star when she performed in Chocolate Kitties, a musical which featured African-American jazz and dance numbers. Hall toured throughout Europe and eventually returned to the US to do shows in Chicago and Harlem. But due to America's racism and poor economy, she returned to live in Paris and eventually London. Adelaide Hall has performed with many greats such as Josephine Baker, Ethel Waters, Louis Armstrong, and Lena Horne, to name a few. But Hall is most known for her recording of Creole Love Song with Duke Ellington. while also being the first female vocalist to record with Ellington. Also, she, along with Louis Armstrong, pioneered scat singing. In 2003, Hall entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's most enduring recording artist, having released material over 8 consecutive decades. In 2006, Adelaide Hall made Great Britain's list of the top 100 Great Black Britons. Adelaide Hall died in 1993 at the age of 92 in her home in London.
Whew, Black women.
Black one, 8 decades. 8
8 decades.
decades of being a recording artist consecutively.
It's giving talent. It's giving
Talent,
talent.
hard work, everything.
Like, ooh, girl, that 8 decades is really it's giving exactly what it needs to give. It's giving Black girl
G8.
magic.
Magic.
Now, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and keep the conversation going down in the comment box below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you are listening to us on our podcast, please rate and review on whatever platform you are using. You can also follow our podcast on Instagram and TikTok at the Melanin Margin for updates of new content.
And if you'd like to follow each of us, our handles are at Daquon MUE
and at Andre Talks a Lot.
Now we will see you all next time on the Melanin Margin, where our goal is always to bring the marginalized to the spotlight in any way we can. Goodbye now.